to Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. Today's conversation promises to be an insightful one with remarkable guests. And whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a regular listener, we're so glad you're here. Our goal is to bring you closer to the innovative leaders and thinkers shaping our future. And today, I am thrilled to welcome Command Sergeant Major Michael T. Hall. In the military, the Command Sergeant Major is the absolute top of the enlisted ranks. They're the backbone of the unit, the fiercely protective father figure who ensures the standards are met and troops are ready for war. Command Sergeant Major Hall spent over 2 decades of his career specifically within the 75th Ranger Regiment. His leadership and tactical brilliance were so universally respected that he achieved something no other soldier in history ever has. He is the only person to have held the senior enlisted position for all 4 of these massive high-stakes commands: the 75th Ranger Regiment, Joint Special Operations Command, United States Army Special Operations Command, and the International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan. Mike didn't just enforce the rules, he helped write them. Working closely alongside legendary commanders like General Stanley McChrystal, Mike helped develop the Big Four, the foundational training standards that every single Ranger must master to this day: marksmanship, physical training, medical training, and small unit battle drills. His impact was so profound that General McChrystal famously described him simply as the best soldier I have ever known. In 2008, after 32 years of grueling service, Mike finally retired. But when your country is fighting a massive war, true leaders don't stay on the sidelines for long. Just a year later, in 2009, he was officially recalled from retirement to serve as a senior enlisted advisor for all U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan. He stepped right back into the fire, helping oversee more than 130,000 troops during one of the most critical turning points of the entire war. After retirement, Mike was employed by Lockheed Martin Corporation as a business development manager for irregular warfare and stability operations. In 2011, he joined the McChrystal Group as a consultant. In 2014, he left the McChrystal Group and was an independent leadership and operational consultant and executive coach for several commercial companies and the Department of Defense. He is a current or past member of the board of directors for the Wounded Warrior Project, Witness to War, U.S. Army Ranger Association, and A Gallant Few, and the Special Operations Medical Association. He currently serves as honorary command sergeant major of the 75th Ranger Regiment. And today, long after hanging up his uniform, Mike is still taking care of his troops as the executive director of the Three Rangers Foundation. Well, welcome to Tipping Spears, Mike.
Oh, thank you for that. That's a great introduction. Probably a little bit long, but yeah, I was a soldier, blessed to serve all those years with great people, and that certainly changed my life.
Oh, well, can you tell us where your story begins? I guess before you were a soldier.
Yeah, I grew up mostly in Lorain County, which is a county just west of Cleveland. Uh, Yeah, interesting childhood. I tell people I lived in 12 different houses, and they go, "Oh, well, that's neat. You moved around." I said, "No, you don't pay the rent. You move the house, So yeah, I never really knew my father. He left when I was 2 or 3. There's a whole side of the family that I don't know, which now as I get older and doctors say, "Do you have a history of this?" And I go, "Well, I can give you half my history." But I went through a couple stepdads. None of them were very good people. So basically grew up on welfare. But all you know is your environment. You don't know what you're missing till you look back. I can't say that I wished my childhood was any different. It is what it was. It shaped me in a way and taught me some lessons. I was lucky to have some couple great role models and a couple uncles of mine who were around and carried their unfair share of burden with my family sometimes. But I always wanted to be a professional baseball player until I came to the conclusion I wasn't good enough. And so I'm not sure I always wanted to be a soldier. I think I always wanted to be a Marine. I actually signed up for the Marines on delayed enlistment.
Oh,
Probably a longer story than it needs to be, but I ended up in the Army as I left the recruiter. The Army recruiter was right there on Broadway and Lorraine was standing outside in his the old khaki uh, Class B uniform. He's standing outside against the wall smoking a cigarette, as people did in the 1970s, and said, "Are you going to join the Marines?" I said, "Yeah, I think I always wanted to be a Marine infantryman." And he goes, "Well, we got something better." He goes, "We got these Rangers." And I'd heard about the Rangers, I think, and I think I'd seen the movie Darby's Rangers, and I'm not sure I made the connections to Merrill's Marauders, but he came in and told me some stories about being a ranger and showed me a film about guys jumping out of airplanes and come to find out later that those weren't rangers, but I didn't know any different. But the Rangers were brand new. They had just reformed, so I signed up to be a Ranger, and I was going to go in, do my time, come back and work for Ford Motor Company or General Motors or U.S. Steel, and get on with my life because college. This is before college loans and all that, and you either had money to go to college or you had a scholarship or you didn't. And so I figured I'd join the service, really with no great goals other than, serve my time and come back out because that was still a tradition where I grew up. That was still sort of kind of expected of guys when they graduated high school to go serve and then come back. But it really wasn't, get a job, get a skill. It was that might have been advertised, but I don't recall that having an effect on me. It's just join the service, and if you're going to be in the army, you should probably be an infantry guy. And so that's how I got in there. The things didn't quite work out. There was no contract for me to go to the Rangers because they were brand new. I actually signed my contract to join the 24th Infantry Division, which was happened to be at Fort Stewart, Georgia at the time. And I remember after AIT, their first sergeant came out and was loading the bus for all the guys to go to airborne school. And, my name didn't get called. And I went up to the first sergeant and I said, I signed up to be an airborne ranger. I've got to, I should be going to airborne school. And he went and checked the list and he said, "Nah, you're not on the list." And he was a good guy. And he went in there and he, pulled my contract and he goes, "Nope, you signed up to be an infantryman in the 24th Infantry Division." I said, "Ooh, lesson number one about life, read what you sign." And so I ended up going to Fort Stewart, and while I was at the replacement detachment, one of the first sergeants from the Ranger battalions and a couple staff sergeants showed up and said, "Who wants to be a Ranger?" And I said, "That's what I signed up for." So I took the old Ranger Special Forces 5 event PT test, and I guess I passed. And I was moved on over to the First Ranger Battalion. So yeah,
Oh.
that's sort of how it got started, and how I ended up there. So I don't think my recruiter. It's easy to say and joke that recruiter lied to me. It's probably I wasn't paying attention, quite frankly. So well, I don't know. Maybe he intentionally lied to me, or maybe I just didn't understand. Or maybe I just wasn't listening well because I think looking back, I was very, very anxious to get out of the environment that I'd grown up in and was interested in doing something else. So yeah, I guess innately I knew I wanted to be involved in something bigger than myself, but I had no concept what it was. I mean, like I said, I always enjoyed sports. I just wasn't very good at any of them.
Mhm.
And so I think that's part of it. Although I don't think I don't think I could comprehend and recognize what that really was at that age.
So was there a particular event or person that kind of served as a catalyst for your career?
Yeah, there really was. There's probably two people. One was a guy named Mike Brooks, my first sergeant when I got to First Ranger Battalion, and he brought me in, and we were at it was the old barracks at Fort because the First Ranger Battalion was still at Fort Stewart, and he brought me in with everybody else in the squad and welcomed me, and And he did a couple things. He goes, we're a STRAC unit, which I'm not sure that uh, the military uses, but that's it's a strategically tough and ready around the clock, I think is what people said it stood for. But he goes, we're a starch and spit shine unit, and that's what the Army was back then. And he goes, do you know how to spit shine your boots? And I said, well, I don't think so. So he grabbed one of my boots and spit shined it, and we got issued 5 or 6 pair of boots back then, and you kept two that were your dress boots, your spit shine boots, and he gave the other boots to the rest of the squad, and they spit shined them up. And I watched him. He goes, "You got it?" And I go, "Yeah, I think I got it." And he goes, do you know how to start your fatigues? You know how to iron?" I said, "Don't, this is 1976." I said, "No, I don't iron. That's women's work. I've changed." But I gave a comment something along those lines, and he goes, "Well, this is before they had laundries and all that. That
Mhm.
stuff wasn't established at Fort Stewart because they're just reactivating it." So he grabbed one of my fatigues, and heavily starched it, and and then gave my other fatigues to the other guys in squad, and they starched them up. We starched up 2 or 3 of them, and then the rest of them were what we called fluff and buff. That's your word of the field. And he goes, "You think you got it?" And I said, "Yeah, I think so." And he goes, "You know how to sew?" And I gave him the same, kind of answer, I think. And he goes, "But we don't wear pin on rank or stuff here." And so, he showed me how to sew, and and just some other things. And I thought it was unique. I mean, they just could have thrown it and thrown it to you, or given it to someone else. But the entire organization was around me, and they did things, and they showed me what was right. And then the last thing, he threw or gave me an envelope that was addressed to my mom. I don't know how he got it. This is before the internet and all that. He goes, "I want you to write your mom. Yeah, okay, here's the number to the CQ, the charge of quarters desk." This is before phones and all that. And he goes, if your mom has any questions about anything, call the charge of quarters, ask for me, and I'll answer any questions that your mom has. And I mean, that was sort of it. And so I went down to the day room. Day rooms were a big deal back then. That's where everybody hung out because
Mhm.
nobody had any money to go out. And there's phones down there and beer machines. And so I called my mom, and again, sort of a little bit of my background growing up. I called my mom and I said, "Mom, I've just met the 10 best friends I've ever had in my life." And that one experience, just the way the sergeant treated me and the other guys treated me. And so that was something very, very different. I knew I had found something, but it became much deeper, in the next days, because we were a very, very standard based unit. It was a very disciplined unit. The non-commissioned officers were something, out of the movies. They weren't mean, but
Mhm.
if not in the not sophomoric, kind of harassment kind of thing, but you met the standard, or things were done to make sure that you understood what you did wrong and you
Mhm.
didn't do it again. And it could be physical sometimes, but not physical because they could, physical because there was you knew there was you walked away from whatever experience you had with your sergeants, and you knew there was a purpose behind it. You knew that you were doing things. I mean, your introduction talked about what a sergeant major does, and the
Mhm.
last line of that was to make sure that their troops are ready for combat. And I think they took that very seriously. Most of them were Vietnam vets, and they'd seen a lot of combat. And so it was, that's how they treated me. And then when we went out there and we did long runs or foot marches, and I just wasn't going to quit, because I wasn't going to quit on those guys. I wasn't going to quit on my sergeant, but it wasn't because I was afraid that I was going to get some wall locker counseling. It was because I didn't want to let those guys down. But I mean, that those kind of things happened, but that wasn't the reason that you met the standard, that you improved. It's because you really truly cared about the people around you. So that was, Sergeant Brooks and my first squad that was assigned to, just the way they treated me. And then, I was probably in shape, but not Army shape, not definitely not Ranger shape. But I didn't, I didn't fall out. I didn't quit because of that kind of, the way I was treated and the way it always happened. I knew immediately that if I had any kind of issue at all, I could go to my sergeants. They were going to solve it. And
Mhm.
I'd never really had that kind of experience before. Yeah. So, yeah, Mike, Sergeant Brooks and the rest of the leaders in my first platoon were very, very influential that way and really certainly changed my life. I mean, it's not I hadn't decided then that I was going to be a career soldier. I joke often that I joined the Army for 3 years and got out 34 years later, which is very true. So it wasn't that kind of reaction. It was just, it was an experience that, playing football and baseball, and basketball that, I'd never experienced that kind of, people talk about, well, teamwork, 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 teamwork you experience in sports is nothing like, what I found in, with that first thing. So, yeah.
So you helped develop the Big Four, so the foundational training standards that every Ranger must master to this day. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah. My memory is it gets a little clouded over the years. It was the concept. I have to. It was probably really more than anything else, General McChrystal.
Mhm.
Uh, Maybe we both sort of kind of developed it or not. We'd always been told that the basics were important.
Mhm.
Uh, that was something we said, and I think the Army still says that the basics are important, but you know what General McChrystal really made us understand was no, it's really about mastering the basics, and if you can't do the basics, then you can't do anything else. And we were quite brutal about that. And some things just caught our attention. Things that I'd known for a while and were pet peeves of mine.
Mhm.
One was physical fitness. I mean,
Mhm.
if you have to if you have to train up to do the physical training test to pass, then your training program is wrong. I mean, you shouldn't have to do that. If you
Mhm.
have to train up to pass the rifle marksmanship course, something is deadly wrong with your training program. I mean,
Mhm.
those are wrong. If you're relying on, we were on, especially in the early days of the Rangers. I mean, if you're relying on the medic, if you get hurt, then you're in again, these are lessons a lot of guys taught us from Vietnam. I mean, if you can't take care of yourself and you can't take care of your buddy, you've got issues because that medic isn't always around. And then sometimes you try to do so much and you train up to the Army called it RTEPs back then. If you had to train up to pass the Army training and evaluation program, if you had to train up to pass a collective task, then something's wrong because I mean, what if we were immediately deployable. And if we weren't good at that stuff right now, there is no time to train up for it. And I mean, it goes back to the big lessons of Task Force Smith and Korea and how the Army was unprepared for Korea and World War I and World War II and the Spanish American War. I mean, the Army has never really been ready for war. And so we decided to take that to the max level and make people understand that no, we were gonna set and this was sort of anti to what Rangers were about. We set standards that could be maintained, but they were basically the minimum acceptable standards. And Rangers didn't like that. I'm not satisfied doing this on my PT test. I want to do much higher. And we'd say, that's fine, but you've also got to maintain these standards of marksmanship, these standards of medical training, these standards of small unit drills. And if you can't maintain those standards, don't come to me and tell me how great you're doing on your PT test because I don't care. Because, the only thing between you and the enemy is your rifle. And if you're not good and spending time, and rifle marksmanship or marksmanship is really not about, going to the range and shooting bullets. That's a lot of it, but it's all the preparation, all the other things that you got to do. And we were pretty brutal about that because, we people say, well, you know, I don't have time to do dry fire drills or go to the range. Or I don't have time to do, you know, we didn't do PT this morning because of, you know, we had something else going on. And, you know, so, you know, tell me what's more important than those big four. And if you can't, then you know, then you need to go back and relook at it. So we definitely took it to the max degree. You know, we forced people to basically realize their shortcomings. I mean, just
Mhm.
it wasn't easy to say you know you say we do PT 5 days a week. Well, here's your training schedule. You know, and over these 20 days that you had to do PT, it says right here you only did PT 12 days. You know, and don't tell me you can shoot because, you know, uh, here's your scores. And well, I did good in the rifle range. Well, that's great. But when we went out there and set up an ambush and we graded you know, we graded the effectiveness of your rounds. I mean, they were down to, you know, less than 10%. So don't tell me that you can shoot because you can't. You know, most of it, you know, we say most of our operations were going to be at night. We didn't have anything that measured how we shoot at night. So you know, we told people we're going to shoot as well at night as we can during the day. And this was early with night vision devices too, and that's impossible. I didn't have the answer on how to do that. McChrystal didn't have the answer how to do that, but we forced, you know, there's smart guys down there. And, you know, so we forced people to come up with solutions and they did, you know,
Mhm.
and they did. And so, you know, that's what the big four is all. And I think it's carried on, you know, to other things because you don't know what kind of mission you're going to be given. You just don't. But we tried to figure out, you know, what were the very basic things that we needed to do. The Army had 8 battle drills at the time for squads and platoons, and we decided, you know, we just couldn't maintain the standard on those 8 battle drills. So we picked the four that we thought, you know, they had tasks within them which would cover everything, and so that's what we spent our time on. But and I think it's still successful. It's funny that you know the basic standards that we set in 1990, you know, 90 95 96 97. I mean, those are, you know, and you look at the basic standards of where the regiment is today and where the Army is today for a large part, and they're much, much higher. So you know, it just proves, you know, if you master you know, mastering the basics is how you get good at the advanced. And, you know, what was the basics before is no longer the basics. A lot of people looked at it as advanced because, you know, that we just got so good at understanding how to be good at the basics. So.
So what do you think is the most underestimated or I guess underutilized element, you know, of good leadership?
Yeah, it's it's a lesson that you learn as you go along, and I think it's a lot humility. You know, some smart guy, you know, said, you know, humility is not thinking less of yourself; it's thinking of yourself less. But
Mhm.
it's one thing to say things, but it's another thing to act that way. It's you know, it's humility. I think is a lot about being a good listener. Humility is not about agreeing with people. You know, humility is about listening, you know, showing that you're a good listener, demonstrating that you're a good listener. That doesn't mean you got to agree with them. Most people, you know, they just want to be listened to and know they've been listened to. And then, you know, hopefully they're mature enough to realize that, okay, you've been listened to, but there's some other things going on. And you don't always have time to give them answers. But, you know, if you can show you listen to them, you know, because you know, someone told me a long time ago, soldiers, you know, soldiers demand and have earned the right to be listened to. But that doesn't, you know, but they don't expect to be agreed with. And you know, that's something that's always agreed, you know, that stuck with me. So, you know, humility to, you know, and having the, you know, having the the humility to say, you know, when you do something and it doesn't work out well, you know, taking responsibility for it. And whether you know, whether you were directly responsible for it or not, or one of your subordinates was responsible for it, I mean, you took responsibility for the failure because if one of your subordinates failed, it's your fault anyways because you didn't train them or you didn't resource them or you didn't supervise them. I mean, nobody wakes up, you know, wanting to do things wrong. And so, you know, taking responsibility when things go wrong is huge. And so I think that's a big part of humility and being transparent and realize that you don't know all the answers, but being willing to just sort of demonstrate that you're not interested in being right, but you're interested in getting it right. And that goes a long way. And someone says, well, what kind of leader is that? Well, that's the kind of leaders that I've always followed is guys that they listened, but they made the decision. And whatever decision they made, boy, I'm going at it 100% and then some because, I believed in them because they believed in me. So I think it's humility, it's transparency, it's and those those things that go into it, but it's just not the word. It's how you act and how you carry yourself. People don't charge machine gun bunkers because the lieutenant or the sergeant says charge the machine gun bunker. They do it because and they don't do it out of blind fear of their leaders. Nobody gives up their life because they're afraid of their leaders. They do it because they respect their leaders. They know that their leaders wouldn't have made the decision if they didn't think it was the right decision. But most importantly, they know that leader, they have the respect of that leader that's going to make sure that they have all the support they can do to make them absolutely, give them the opportunity to be successful in whatever that is. And that's why people do those kind of things. And of course, that goes over to the rest of the organization, the guys on your left and right, because they all have the same feeling about their leaders and about each other. So it's an environment that you create, and people are people. I'm not sure you can change people. I think science will probably tell you by the time you're 18 or 20. I mean, your mores, your ethics, who you are, what you think, your prejudices, your biases are sort of kind of set. But leaders can set an environment and change how people act. And, that's what the Army, the services, specifically the Ranger units that I were in were very good at, was setting environments where people cared about something bigger than themselves because they did. So, yeah.
I love that interested in getting it right, as opposed to interested in being right.
Yeah, somebody said that. Henry Ford, Teddy Roosevelt, Donald Duck. Somebody said that a long time ago. I'm not sure who it is, but it's interesting. And and looking back, I think at a certain point in my career, I think I was that kind of leader. I know I probably wasn't always that leader, but I think maybe I was. I didn't know it, but those are going back to the Mike Brooks and the Steve Rondeaus and Danny Doyle's. Those kind of guys taught me those kind of things. And I'm not, there was no books or fancy things written about that, but that's how they were raised in the military. I don't think any of them were raised that way in civilian life, quite frankly. I'll go out on a little bit of a limb. I know I certainly wasn't. But I think that's what, that's one of the things the military brings and good organizations bring. So.
So you retired after 32 years from the Army, and then you're recalled a year later to go back to Afghanistan. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah. Uh, when I retired the first time, I sort of looked around and I had been Army Special Operations Sergeant Major for a while. Had three great commanding generals. We were at
Mhm.
war,
Mhm.
so you were always busy, helping to prioritize and make sure folks had the right equipment and training to be successful, and you pick the right people to be there. And so I thought I was doing good things, but at a certain point you realize, and I'd been through this before because I spent a lot of time, I spent a lot of time in the Rangers, a lot of time in certain positions. I was a platoon sergeant for almost 6 years. I was a company first sergeant of the same company, for almost 6 years, and I would find that every once in a while, I'd catch myself being a little bit complacent, not lazy. Could be lazy, but not lazy. But it's just you just take things for granted, and things would happen. I go, I got to reblue myself. I got to get back, to the basics of attention to detail. And at a certain point, after being USAC Sergeant Major for about 6 years, 6+ years, I thought, it's time to move on. And there really wasn't, the wars were still going on. And there really just wasn't an opportunity out there that I felt that I could give, my full energy to. I just reached that point and I thought it was time to get out and do something different. And it was definitely time, and part of it was just a guy named Perry Bear who was a Sergeant Major Special Forces Command at the time, and I thought this is the guy that needs to bring the energy that I don't have anymore. So that was a lot of it. I mean, I didn't control who replaced me. I think I had some influence, but Perry was there, and I thought he was the right guy to step in and take the organization to a newer level or bring that energy. So I got out and I was out for about a year working for Lockheed Martin. Was really, really lucky as I fell into that. Some guys that used to work for me, heard I was getting out and told their bosses about me, and they created a job for me, which is pretty neat, which I enjoyed. Lockheed Martin's a wonderful company that really takes care of veterans, really, really takes care of veterans. And then General McChrystal got appointed to be the commander of Afghanistan and ISAF. And uh, we talked, before he had moved over there. And I said, yeah, I asked, you know, I'd been very disappointed in the whole of government effort into Afghanistan. We hadn't been in Afghanistan for 7 years. We'd been there, 7 times 1 year at a time, and there was really no strategy to win. So we're sending soldiers, but we didn't, they would be there for a year and they'd come out and then someone would backfill them and they really weren't making progress. Of course, it was beyond the Army and the military to do that. And so I said, are you going to be given the resources to win? Are you going to be given the resources to win and truly implement a campaign plan with measurable progress? And I mean, that's Stan McChrystal is we're going to do something. There's going to be measurable progress. And so what you're doing, you can look at it and say, yeah, we got better. Yeah, we got better. Yeah, we got better because we know what the end state wants, what we want the end state to be. And so we talked for a while, and he convinced me that he was going to be given the resources that he needed to do it, and he explained the plan on how he thought we could be successful, which I agreed with because it's what I had thought for a while, not being a great military strategist, but being intimately involved. And so I said, well, if you ever need anything, let me know. And then I got a call a couple of days later and he said, would you come back on active duty and be the senior enlist advisor? And so I talked to, you know, I think I said yes, and then I talked to my wife. I don't know. Well, I'm glad she's not here. She's at lunch with her girlfriends. Uh, but but I said sure because you spend all that time in those organizations, and your wife and your son and the rest of my extended family. I mean, they're always so proud of you, and you're such a you're the best, and we've never had anybody in the family like you. Those kinds of things. And so I figured, of course, well, Mike's going back in and, to help me with another worthy cause. And the reaction was, I was really taken aback because nobody was happy. Nobody was excited for me.
Yeah.
Nobody was, wow, great, you're going back. And I think it was, after all those years of, okay, you're finally done with it, and now you're going to go back and, you might get hurt again. And
Mhm.
and you're going to be gone again a lot.
Mhm.
And it was a much different reaction. Of course, everybody supported it because they knew it was important. They knew it was important to me. They knew if it was important enough to bring me back on active duty after 30 years, which you can't because once you're a 30-year man, you can't be recalled unless there's a declared war, which hasn't happened since December of 1941. So they supported it. Although my wife Brenda uh, tells Stan all the time that his left arm, belongs to her because that was a cost of getting me back. But so I went over there because I believed in the mission. I obviously believed in Stan McChrystal. Uh, so yeah, so I went back over there to do what I thought Sergeant Major should be doing to help him implement his plan. And I think we were making a tremendous amount of progress, but we just didn't have we didn't have the whole of government and the assets to do what we needed to do, quite frankly. And it was a rude awakening in some ways, and it was not disappointment in Sam McChrystal, but it was sort of a disappointment on people that said things, but then politics sort of got in the way, and it's just I don't want to so the last couple months weren't as great as I thought, but going into it, I think there was a great culture change. I think there was an attitude of winning was defined. People at squads and platoons, the guys that fight the war, they understood, pretty
Mhm.
much what winning really was, and I think they believed in it. So yeah, so I went back and I don't regret it. Because it was a great experience, and I felt we made differences, and yeah, so
So there's a lot of uncertainty, in the world. What advice do you have for people who struggle, to make decisions in a timely manner, especially when the stakes are high? They kind of get paralyzed if they don't have like the one right answer that's pretty obvious.
yeah, I do that. I think because we're all sensitive. Fortunately for me, I have a background to realize that whatever I say or whatever I worry about, it's usually about not about me. It's how it affects other people,
Mm.
and I'm a very very sensitive person about making mistakes, but
Mhm.
I think the way I looked at life is I realized a long time ago because I made a lot of mistakes as a leader, and I realized that people didn't judge me by my mistakes; they judged me by my character. And I always, I'll say some things sometimes or do some things that are contrary to conventional wisdom, I guess you could say. And but it is who I think I am. It is who my character is, and I think no matter what I do or what mistakes I make, I think I just look at it as, I judge people by their character. I don't judge people by their mistakes. When you make a mistake, you can correct it. And if you're in the military again, there's a leader somewhere who's really responsible for that in the first place. So, it's to be judged by your character and not by the mistakes. And I think that's what's a lot of times in society, people are so afraid to make mistakes because whether it's, a zero defect or you've got to do something to make the quarterly earnings call look good.
Mhm.
People are so afraid to take initiative, and that's a culture that has crept into America in a lot of ways, and it was not the culture of, post World War II and, when the great innovators were there. And I think it was because, I mean, the greatest thing about the greatest generation is people weren't afraid to fail. They had no guidelines. They were given great responsibility and they just took that responsibility and ran with it. And, that kind of attitude is for a lot of reasons has changed a little bit, but uh, yeah, I think it's not being afraid to do what you think is right, and when you're making that decision, what is it right for the people that you're around, and it's not always comfortable decisions, I've learned just over and over again that sometimes those short-term decisions they really pay off in the long term, and you have to be able to live with yourself. It's hard to say no to people or I disagree with you, but if you know it's right, I can't really think of an experience where I told someone something that they didn't want to hear and I truly regretted it because it was a personal decision and or anybody ever came back to me, most of those you hear a lot of stories of, thanks for kicking me out of the Ranger Battalion. Thanks for not hiring me. Because things happen for a reason, and by you taking the time to explain why you made the decision, it made me think and act a little bit different. So I think it's having the gumption to tell people the hard things sometimes, and most people are afraid to do that because they you know Friendship is important. Respect is if I was Webster and you said what is the definition of friendship, I'd say it was mutual. It's two words, it's mutual respect. And I think I have very few friends. But I have a lot of friends because I have a lot of folks that I think there's mutual respect out there. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm. I think that's a great, great perspective. So today you serve as executive director of the Three Rangers Foundation. Can you tell us about the organization and what y'all do?
Yeah. The organization started in 2014. In 2018, as I was basically retiring out of working for money with
Mhm.
Scott's Miracle-Gro Company, another great organization that really takes care of veterans and people, quite frankly. Uh, Treated me very, very well. They asked me to come on as the executive director of the Rangers Foundation, and I said okay, but I want to change the focus. I want to change because I'd been involved in nonprofits and had been
Mhm.
quite disappointed at
Mhm.
for the most part of the 46,000 veteran nonprofits out there. I
Yeah.
thought many of them had lost their focus. They were more about the organization than what the organization was formed to do.
Mhm.
And I think part of that is, it's sort of goes back to the big four. Let's focus on what we can affect. Let's nug this down to the very basics. And I said, what I want to do is we're going to support current and former members of the 75th Ranger Regiment. And it's not a parochial thing. It's not a tribal thing. It's not we are over here and you're not
Mhm.
worthy. It has nothing to do with that. But I just, I've only got so much time and energy, and I decided to spend the time and energy on helping current and former members of the 75th Ranger Regiment transition out of the Army. And everybody gets out of the Army, and it sort of goes back to my personal story. It's not a joke or a cute line when I say I joined the Army for 3 years and got out 34 years later. I mean, it's what happened. It was mostly family decisions which kept me in,
Mhm.
which is not something you always hear, but it is. But so, everybody gets out of the Army at a certain point, so let's help them do that. And I was lucky to bump into a regimental commander, or as the honorary sergeant major of the regiment, the regimental commander and sergeant major called me in and said, we want you to. The Army already had the Soldier for Life program. He said, we want to
Mhm.
start this Ranger for Life program, and it's basically a transition organization to help Rangers transition. And I don't know if I said it or the colonel said it or the sergeant major said it, but the Army's constantly changing, and you're at the mercy of society on the people that you get into your organization. But it's a tried and true business model. If you want to recruit and retain the best people, you're going to have to invest in them. And the Army's never been very good at that because they're afraid if you invest in people, they'll leave. But it's like, listen, everybody gets out of the Army. It's a matter of when. And maybe if you treat them right, like I was treated, uh, you know, maybe they'll stay in because maybe that's the right people you're on in your organization. Some people are going to stay in, some people are going to get out, but if you treat them right, maybe you're gonna get the right kind of people. And so we stood up this organization called the three, or we readjusted the Three Rangers Foundation, and we adjusted to this Ranger for Life program, and we came up with what we call the Big Five of transition that we concentrate on, and opportunities out there are going to come from networks. So we're blessed to have a very tight network of former unit members that are willing to help other guys and making guys understand, getting out and getting your VA benefits by doing your benefits do it delivery, uh, is huge because it takes a tremendous amount of stress off of you because you're going to have that paycheck, your disability paycheck. So we've got a system in there to do that. Education is different for everybody. It's not traditional going to school, but it's
Mhm.
trades, it's non-traditional. The Ranger Regiment has invested in putting education counselors down at unit level, and it's part of the professional development model that you have to get education. Whether you get a degree or not, that's at the end of the day, that's up to you, but the opportunity and the emphasis is there. Having an education certainly doesn't guarantee success, but it removes a lot of stumbling blocks, so that's important. understanding basics of financial wellness, not telling people how to invest in stocks and bonds and that kind
Mhm.
of stuff, but the basics of financial wellness. And these were all things that, as I look back at my career, is what my leaders did for me. I mean, when I got back from Ranger School, my lieutenant called me in and he goes, "Are you going to re-enlist?" And I said, "No, sir." And he goes, "What are you going to do when you get out?" I said, "I'm not really sure." I said, "I'm probably going to go back to work for Ford. My uncle worked for Ford." And he goes, "How much money do you have in your savings account?" I said, "I don't have a savings account." And he goes, "Well, we're going to go down and we're going to open up a savings account." And so he took me down there to do that. And my sergeant took me over to the personnel and I started an allotment and I put $50 away because the lieutenant said, "You're going to put $50 away and you're never going to miss it." And he was right. And that grew much bigger and I became very financially secure. And then one day, then my platoon sergeant called me in, who was a very smart guy, and he said, "How much college you got?" And I said, "I don't need college. I'm going to work for Ford Motor Company." And he goes, "Now you're going to get some college. You're going to need that because you don't want to be, turning bolts the rest of your life." And so took me over to the education center and helped me with that. And so, those kinds of things, I had leaders along the line that always did those things for me. So I wanted to make sure that, that was the kind of leader I try to become too, is
Mhm.
realize everybody's going to get out of the army. So uh, how do you set them up for success? The problem, those are great examples, but nobody in the chain of command can tell you what it is after the army. No one can tell you how to
Mhm.
transition because nobody in the army has ever transitioned before, or very few. And so that's why, the Three Rangers Foundation became an important part of that. Is we have counselors at each of the Ranger battalions inside their footprints. They're former Rangers. Rangers are very cliquish or tribalish, whatever you want to say, but they trust people that have a
Mhm.
background that they trust. So it was important to have counselors that in first and second battalion, they're retired sergeant majors, so they've got plenty of time in the Rangers. They can talk the talk. They understand what life is like and they've gotten out of the army. They're not experts, but we have a whole bunch of experts out there that can help you with that. So, and the unintended consequence of the Ranger for Life program is really how, not unintended but unanticipated, was how important the Ranger for Life program has become to veterans
Mhm.
because because it's reconnected veterans. Everybody wants to help. Most people will look back and say that was a unique, I don't want to say the best part of my life, but a unique part of my life, definitely one of the best parts of my life. And I was around a group of people that I'd never been around before, and so that's important to most people. So by having the transitioning rangers reach out to the veteran rangers and pick their brains about, tell me how to be an FBI agent. Tell me how you got into cyber. Tell me how you got how did you get into Harvard Business School? Tell me what success looks like. Tell me what it's really like to be an attorney. And to be able to give back. I think the program has become more valuable to the veterans. And at the end of the day, people will say, "Do you do mental health?" And I go, "Yes and no." I think we do because you know the three biggest factors of unsuccessfully transition service members is they had a bad transition. So we've got a very robust program in place that helps guys have a good transition. It supplements the Army's TAP and Soldier for Life program. And so I think, guys get out and they talk to veterans, they talk to our counselors, and you only transition once. And if you don't do it right, you can't go
Mhm.
back. So they pretty much have a good experience transitioning, understanding what's available to them. And the other two factors are our finances and relationships. And again, we get at that a couple ways. One, we make sure, guys all get their BDD, so they're pretty much walking out with a VA rating within 30
Mhm.
days after they get out, so they got that. And again, we give them some financial education. And then the other part of that is our mentor network. And if opportunities come from networking, they don't come from
Mhm.
resumes. I even saw on LinkedIn, that's what they do is link people up, and I saw some stats on LinkedIn that from them that only 5% of resumes even get looked at, and of those five, four of them are saying thanks but no thanks. It's about networking, it's about who you know, because no organization wants, there's some specific cases, but no organization wants to hire someone on a resume because that's you
Mhm.
vouching for yourself. If somebody says, hey, I'm going to put my name behind this person, I think you should take a look at them. Maybe they don't meet all your prerequisites, but I think they can do their job. I mean, that's what companies are looking for because it
Mhm.
reduces risk. Nobody wants to, hire someone and find out they got the wrong person. And especially, the person that's recommending them, they're successful. And if they're recommending this guy, says, "Oh, I want one of them."
Mhm.
And so it works really good. So guys are pretty much walking out of guys that go through the program are walking out in the Army and walking into a job or walking into finishing school or getting into a graduate degree program. It's if you just go out there and fill out the link, you're probably not going to be successful. But if you talk to people that are already in Harvard Business School or Booth or any of the great or Emory or any of the great graduate programs out there, I mean, this is the kind of person they're looking for. Here's what they're looking for on the resumes. I'm not sure if this is right or not, but here's my resume. And they talk to four guys from Emory and they all give him this guy his resume. And they say, "Oh, here's some commonalities here." And that's me too. So, the chance of success is really good. Here's the questions they ask me. I'm not sure they're going to ask you these questions, but if you're prepared for those kind of questions, and here's the answers I gave. I'm not sure if they're right or wrong, but I got accepted. And so, getting into a program like that and getting to the program that you want, it is like getting a job. It's understanding what success looks like. So, so guys are walking out into that and we hopefully get to them uh, soon enough. The regiment's memorandum for record says that they're supposed to go see the counselor at 18 months of getting out of the service. That doesn't mean they've made the decision to get out, but it's sort of a checkpoint of when they're going to get out of the service. And families are a big part of that, and we try to get them involved. So, in a nutshell, that's what Three Rangers does. I mean, it's a transition organization, but it isn't. It is the Ranger for Life program. It's a job organization, but it's not really. We don't do jobs, we do networking. And the end result out of that will be good opportunities and making sure people understand what they're getting into before they invest in it. So, and the other, most people get out and they really, quite frankly, they lose contact with all the guys who are in what they do. And it's life gets busy. Guys that are still in, they got different priorities, you got different priorities, and you fade away, and the mentorship program fills that gap. There's no gap anymore, so that they always know there's guys like them out there that they can rely on. So that's how we get at those big three of financial wellness and relationships and a good transition. Doesn't fix all the problems, but people will still have demons. But if you don't, those are the big three that
Mhm.
cause those demons to be uncontrollable.
Mhm.
And so if you can, eliminate or minimize them, then hopefully you can handle everything else. So it's anecdotally, and of course it'll always only be anecdotally, but guys that go through, they're not having issues. They're not
Mhm.
having issues that become extreme.
Mhm.
They're not hanging out on Facebook with all kinds of issues. They're fairly well adjusted,
Mhm.
and it's not the organization. It's the Ranger Brotherhood that we're lucky enough to be part of, and we just happen to be the mechanism that tries to make that happen. So it's not me. It's not the organization. It's just like, again, a framework, a mechanism that sort of brings everybody together. And it's not just the Three Rangers Foundation. There's basically 19 organizations out there that are quote unquote, Ranger Foundations or Ranger Associations. So, and every organization does something a little bit different. And so, a lot of things that we don't do that, this organization does that, or this organization does that, or whatever. And, and other great organizations out there, like we're big fans of Wounded Warrior Project because, their VSOs are really good.
Mhm.
Guys say, hey, they made it easy. And, and the method of effectiveness for me is very few people put in appeals. So they do it right the first time. And again, that's a tremendous mental strain off of people,
Mhm.
and it goes back to financial wellness and your VA benefits and understanding that. So it doesn't solve all the problems, and we never solve all the problems because you can't walk in another man's shoes. But it hopefully gets at the big things, and the resources are there, and we hear a lot. Just knowing that other people are there, whether I talk to them or not, is huge, and it reduces a tremendous amount of anxiety. And if if you don't have to deal with a lot of anxiety, you think a lot clearer and you can make a lot better decisions, quite frankly, and you can focus your time and efforts on what your priorities really need to be.
That sounds like a fantastic organization. So thank you for for leading that important initiative. So any final words of advice or parting thoughts for the audience today?
No, other than, try to always look at things from other people's perspectives. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but try to look at it from their perspectives. And talk to people face to face. It's unfortunate what social media has become in some cases, but take the time to talk to people face to face. Figure out what's important to life for other people, and you'll probably find that it's more important to your life than you thought. And that's a lifelong lesson. It's something a lesson that took me a long time to learn. I think also, and yeah, I guess that's about it because I just had a senior moment and sort of lost my track of time, which happens unfortunately quite a bit. But
Uh,
yeah, but you don't surround yourself by good people. Good people surround themselves, and hopefully, you become in their circle because of how you treat other people. And just I learned, day one in A Company First Ranger Battalion is treat people how you want to be treated, and life will be pretty good. And if you can just keep that going, it's amazing how that environment, more and more people will become part of that circle, and it gets pretty big. Just like the Ranger for Life program, it's amazing how big it is because we all have something in common, and we all grew up in different squads, platoons, companies, different eras, different times of war or peace, but there's that one thing that holds us all together. So we're lucky to be amongst that.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your insights and experiences. I know your contributions to our nation have impacted so many, both in the United States and abroad, and really appreciate you taking time to talk on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tipping Spears. I hope this conversation has sparked new ideas and challenged the way you think about our future. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll catch you next time with another exciting guest.